Hey everybody, this is James Davis, also known as James282 for StoxPoker. Here making my second video. Today I'm going to be playing two tables of $50 buy-in no limit on full tilt poker. I have been experimenting a little bit in these games so far and getting my feet wet, so I think I have an okay idea of how the games play now. Today, hopefully, I look to go into a few different concepts, the first of which is how I change my semi-bluffing strategy for these games, and the second is going to be how I change my continuation betting strategy for these games, and then the third is going to be how I change my value betting strategy for these games. So hopefully as we go along we'll get in some interesting spots where we can explore all of those concepts, and we'll have a good time. I have had some success so far in these games. One thing that strikes me right off the bat is that I really feel like the amount of information available in these games is just like a lot larger than the games I'm used to. So hopefully I'll be able to share some of that information gathering ability with you guys, because I think a lot of stuff is going on here. Bet sizing tells, timing tells, bet pattern tells. All sorts of stuff is going on. So I look forward to being able to exploit that. Alright, well, we had a hand over here just now. 1 second. I think my man Yellow Rat here put a little money in the pot pre-flop with 4-8 offsuit, so we're excited to play against him unless he's some other shark making a video. This guy is almost busted. I'm just going to check it to him. I'm going to let him make a decision as to whether he wants to get himself busted off. Now I'm going to bet, though, because that 10 makes a lot more draws, and it makes more pairs for him to have. Unfortunately, he's just not. He's just holding on for dear life with that last couple bucks. So. But anyway, another thing I've noticed is that basically I feel like I can divide the players into in these games into essentially two groups. The group that is trying to play well, but who doesn't really play that great yet, and the group that's just here to have fun. So obviously it's two very different strategies when playing against both of these groups. This is an interesting continuation betting spot. I don't think that, this board just like misses everybody all the time. So I'm going to bet a little smaller. We're going to call if this guy goes all in, because I tend to think I'll have outs against whatever garbage he has, but we're going to just bet a little smaller because I want to start putting the screws to this Yellow Rat guy. Although, I'm going to actually go back in time for a second. I'm going to see if he posted that hand. Yeah, okay, he posted actually. Alright, so that obviously changes things. I am going to just start pounding away on him. That 5 is a pretty terrible card. Now I can't pound. I was hoping for some sort of overcard to come. I was going to bet more. But when that 5 comes, he's not folding a full house. So now we have to give up. Okay, it's just about what I thought he had. But I thought it very possible that I'd be able to get him to fold that hand if I could get like a couple running high cards, or I can always make a pair. So I think betting the turn's not so bad. But anyway, like I was saying, we have the two groups of people who are trying to play well and the ones who are just playing for fun, and both groups are very, very exploitable, I have to tell you. I think a lot of the group that is trying to play well is making a lot of pretty fundamental mistakes. Most of them involve giving up too easily, and the thing about that is that not a lot of people in these games are putting them to the test. So in general, it's probably not a mistake, but players like us can swoop in and really make their strategy one that we can exploit, pretty easily. I think these guys who are like often calling a flop bet but without plans to call the turn bet are going to be in pretty bad shape against us, because we're really ready to to pressure people who, when it looks like they only have one pair or worse, on boards where it's very unlikely they can have two pair or better. So those people are going to have a really hard time dealing with our continuation betting strategy. And hopefully we'll get in some spots where we can talk about that stuff. Talk about my reads a little bit first, because I have been playing these tables for 40 minutes or something, trying to develop some sort of reads. On our table on the left here, Batty Boo is trying to play well, I think, but he's kind of a short stack. He yells about people being lucky all the time, so we're just going to assume he's not a very good player. The Poker Deal seems to be some sort of regular. He did snap off a bluff of mine earlier. This guy is obviously just busted. I keep forgetting that when I raise my garbage. David MT seems to not be a very strong player. Judging, he buys in short. He's also, he's not a player that we fear too much. On our other table, these players are pretty much all new, except Joe Monty here. Called a raise pre-flop with 6-7, then open shoved $35 into an $8 pot on a 6-4-4 2-diamond board. I had a big diamond draw. I called it, snapped him off. Excuse my yawning. So he's not going to be a very strong player taking that line with the 6-7. And this guy over here, I don't want to pronounce his name, Esmamitsu something. Doesn't seem so great. But, I think he's like a regular who isn't going to just give it over to us, but he's also not driving action. Or we don't fear any of the players on these tables so far, so we hope that they'll all be exploitable to some degree. Jack 10, I'll just call. Death Tan Killer is still waiting for a pair or something to get the rest of his money in. The Poker Deals did catch us on a big bluff before with one pair hand, so he is going to be wary of us in the future. It's something we're definitely going to have to keep in mind. But other than that, we're just going to assume people are pretty typical. We're going to assume people who buy in for full stacks are going to be okay, and people who buy in for less than full stacks aren't going to be. So 8-7 suited, we are going to call and bite in some action behind us, hopefully from some weaker players. And we're calling with the idea that we're going to try to take it away from this guy on a couple different flops, because, well, that's not one of them. This is a great spot to start talking about semi-bluffing. Okay, so he bets 250 into 410. Ace high boards are different than most boards in that if he does have a hand like ace king, he's going to consider himself, way ahead most of the time, so I will just call. But in general, I think it's a better strategy to semi-bluff less in lower stakes games than it is in higher stakes games, because what we want to think about regarding semi-bluffing, there are several factors to consider. The first factor, in my mind, is our opponent likely to pay us off if we make our draw? Because in no limit hold'em, where it differs from limit hold'em, in limit hold'em, for instance, it's always a good result pretty much if our opponent folds. There are times where we want our opponent to call, but those are rare compared to times we'd rather our opponent folds. And so semi-bluffing as a concept, a successful semi-bluff in limit hold'em is great for us. We would often love to raise our flush draw on the flop and have our opponent fold. And that's different in no limit hold'em because our implied odds are so much greater usually than they are in limit hold'em. We can win a whole stack if we make some sort of disguised straight or make a flush in no limit hold'em, whereas in limit hold'em we're often just winning one bet. So I am just going to pound here real quick with the Jack 7. Try to maintain an aggressive image I have been here for a while, but I haven't been playing with all of these players for a while, so I need to kind of to redo that. Image considerations I don't think are quite as great in lower stakes games, but they still apply to some degree, partially because people are playing only one table a lot of times. So Xavier, the 9 is kind of not a great card to continue firing on, but we are going to continue pressuring. I read this player as one who is trying to play well, and she min raises or he min raises or whatever. So I'm assuming that he got there with like an 8-7, or maybe he just flopped me dead with like ace-5 or something. So now we'll dump it. That bet could have been suspect, but I'm not really sure. One thing I will say also before I get back into my ideas about semi-bluffing is that I do not promise at all to play perfectly in the videos where I'm playing smaller stakes, because I'm still not totally familiar on how the game textures are, but I think for me it's more valuable, and it can be more better for educational purposes if I do continue to just try to learn more about how my opponents are playing. And oftentimes when you fold, it's hard to learn more about what your opponents are doing, so I just like to try to put them in tough spots and have them react for me. Anyway, as I was saying though, my opponents in higher stakes games, when I'm on a draw, aren't gonna always go broke. Like let's say they have pocket queens on a 9-7-3 2-spade board. They're not always gonna go broke if the 6 of spades comes off on the turn. Whereas I think in these games, what I've found so far is that people are pretty much going broke with their queens as long as no overcard comes. And so, back to that example, let's say I have Jack 10 of spades on a 9-7-3 2-spade board. I think that very often in my higher limit games, I'm very much inclined to start raising and getting them to either fold a better hand, or usually I'm raising to get them to fold a better hand, and if called, I'm not in bad shape. Whereas in these games, why should I try to get in as like some sort of slight favorite or whatever, when I can very often just try to make the best hand and get the rest of the money? I find that there's a lot more value in that. We're just going to give up with the 3s. But I think that, oh yeah, Death Tan Killer takes it down with the 9 deuce off. That's like a cover of a Sklansky book or something. Okay, so like I was saying, I think that the two considerations, first of all, that we're unlikely to get paid off, and the second consideration being that my opponents in higher stakes games are also putting me to the test so much more, really makes it so semi-bluffing is a better strategy in those games, whereas in these games, semi-bluff, I'll just say semi-bluff raising, isn't always the most cost-effective way to semi-bluff, because very often a hand will go down, and now here I do have such a strong draw that I'm going to bet, and now I check min raises. I think he has a jack. I'm going to call and try to make a diamond, and now I go up. That was a strange hand. Possibly played incorrectly. So this guy's like a slow play monkey, probably. I probably blew that one. But like I was saying, semi-bluff raising on the flop is not always going to be your best option, because in my games too, back to our example where the board is 9-7-3 with 2 spades, my opponents are very likely to, if some blank comes on the turn of 3 of clubs, my opponent are very likely to continue to test me with my my draw, and continue to think like that maybe I can fold a small pair. Maybe they think I'll fold 7-8 if they keep betting. They know that a lot of my one pair hands have bad reverse implied odds, so they're going to continue to test me. Whereas like with ace king in these games, I've found that it's very few opponents who are willing to continue to battle me once I've called a flop on a board like that, and then a blank comes off. They figure that I'm not going anywhere, because most opponents in these games aren't going anywhere when that happens. And so I can still semi-bluff. Ace king is still a better hand than mine on a 9-7-3 board when I have jack 10 of spades, but when they check, I can bet the turn. and get them to fold their better hand. And it's a better hand that also isn't going to give me action when I make my hand anyway, so I'm still semi-bluffing in a sense, but I'm doing it without committing as much money as I was in the other case, and I'm doing it in such a way that I'm semi-bluffing with more information. I'm getting them off a hand that I'm pretty sure to be better than mine, but I'm doing it without really having to worry about getting it in as a coin flip. Now 7-9 suited, often I would call, but these guys are both shorties. Going to be hard for me to turn a profit post flop with it. 8-10 suited, I am going to call. Not much of a flop for me, but I'm going to contest it, I think, if he bets. Now he checks, and now I win, pretty much. And so yeah, those are the two main factors of semi-bluffing, or spots where you would want to semi-bluff right off the bat are how likely is my opponent going to pay me off if I get there, and how likely is my opponent can continue to test me if I just call on the flop. So those two factors in mind, I think both of those factors swing very heavily in favor of just calling with a lot of my draws on the flop in these games. And so, that's often what you'll see me doing. Because I think it is kind of a mistake. I was talking to my younger brother's friend, who's a kind of a fledgling poker player. I think he plays $25 buy-in, no limit now. And he was telling me about some hand, just talking to me about how high variance things were going for him and so on. Telling me about some hand where he raised it all in with Jack-10 suited on a queen-high board, trying to make his opponent fold. But that is just, in my opinion, not a winning play. Not the best, not the optimal play in these games, because, like I said, guys they're so much more willing to give up when they don't have anything, and so much more willing to pay off when they do, that why not just call? Why not just call and make the best hand and win all the money? There's a lot of money to be won doing that. And I think that semi-bluffing concept applies to both our good players in these games. The good players meaning the ones that are better than the terrible players, and the ones who aren't that great, because even the not great players will have trouble coming after us when they've missed. Alright, so with the King 3 suited, this is a spot hopefully I can start exploring my ideas about just continuation betting. So Soul Twister just calls. I think he is a player that's trying to play well. He was on a table of mine before. I'm going to keep betting this board, thinking that I'm going to get him to fold unless he makes two pair. I'm going to think about, and I was right. So that is definitely a good spot to start talking about. Jack-9 suited over here is kind of standard. That is definitely a good spot to start talking about continuation betting. I find that in these games, on boards where your opponents are unlikely to have two pair or better, it's almost always correct to continue to bet against the guys that you read as trying to play well. Because a lot of these guys have trouble putting you on a stone cold bluff and then also continuing to call down. They've gotten to where they are in these games by not always paying off, like ace-3 on an ace-10 7-2 board, and it's often tough for them to commit a whole stack with that, because in general in these games it's just not the right play. So what we wind up doing is breaking down our continuation bets in the sense that what we're going to figure is basically that pre-flop we give our opponents some sort of range, maybe they play 20% of their hands. I don't have stats on these players, but say in general, a guy who plays 20% of his hand. Now he calls my pre-flop raise. The flop comes down ace-10-2 like it did last time. All of a sudden, no part of his range, a really super duper small part, is a set, two pair, or even a really strong draw. So we bet the flop, getting a very good price. Say we bet 2/3 pot. into a pot. We'd say we bet, for simplicity's sake, let's just say we bet pot. Okay, so the pot is $5. We bet $5. In a vacuum, if our bet works half the time, then we break even. If it works more than half the time, then we show a profit. Now, we know that on an ace-10-2 board, our opponent is not going to make a hand that he can continue with more than half the time, so immediately our bet shows a profit. Now, it gets a little trickier when our opponent decides to call. So, our opponent decides to call an ace-10-2, like our opponent did 2-diamond board, and now we figure, his range has narrowed dramatically from what it was before we knew that he was going to call the flop, because we now know we have more information, right? We know that he cold called pre-flop. We also know that he called a flop of ace-10-2 with 2 diamonds. So now his range has become far more weighted to hands like a diamond draw. You figure many of the 10s will call once on the flop, like from 10-8 suited up to king-10. You figure any ace will call the flop, to be sure. Occasionally, some sort of small pair, but not usually. So now his range is reweighted, and it's weighted more heavily towards one pair ace hands probably than anything else. But our opponents that are attempting to play well, like Soul Twister, my read on him, just because he has an ace doesn't mean that he's going to go broke. So once again, I'm getting a new proposition, a new game on the turn, and my new game on the turn is, okay, say, I don't remember exactly what the pot was, but say it's $9 on the turn. Now I can bet, if I want to bet pot again, I bet $9 on the turn, and he gets a new price. He's getting a price where now he has to pay $9 to continue to the river, and another full pot size bet, and he's going to get tested on the river as well. So a lot of his ace rag hands, when he sees me bet the flop, he's going to think, man, this guy has to know I have an ace. He continues to bet. Guys in these games generally don't continue to press unless they have a better ace than I have, so I have to get away. And once again, if I bet pot on the turn, and I'm usually betting less than pot on the turn, so I'm getting an even better price in this, but for simplicity's sake, okay, so let's say I bet half pot on turn, risk $5 to win the $10 in the pot. In that sense, now I only have to win a third of the time in order to break even, because that's just the price I'm getting on my bet. There's $10 in there. I risk $5, and if he folds a third of the time, then I've immediately shown a profit. And so basically, my idea is that I want to try to think about what percentage of his range that he calls the flop with will wind up folding the turn, and I'll fold the queen jack offsuit here out of position. This is kind of garbage. And so what I'll just do is I'll bet again, and a 7 is a perfect card for me to bet again on also, because I think if he has 2 pair at that point, I'll hear from him on it. I think he'll raise it up to 7, doesn't complete any straights or anything like that. That he's going to be scared that his ace 7's no good, and I think at that point he'll just try to be getting value from me. So I get to bet again there, and then I get to bet again there, and then if he decides he wants to continue, he's going to get to face the same decision again on the river, because so few rivers, once again, are going to be making him 2 pair. I'm going to be figuring that if he had 2 pair or better, he would have heard from me, or we would have heard from him, and we're just in a really good spot to continue to put him to the test, and that's just what I do against players in these games, because each bet, there's certainly a risk of compounding your errors by continuing to just bluff and bluff and bluff, but now he re-raises me, I'm going to get away here. Could be that he's squeezing, but we just ran him over a little bit. And queen 10 is just not enough to continue with. But yeah, if we do go back and look at each one of our choices, we have a choice on the flop to continuation bet. That choice is very obvious. We are almost always going to want to be firing off on those boards, because our opponents are often just forced to give up right away. It becomes a little... If that flop bet is clearly profitable, then the turn bet is a little closer. We're not always going to be betting full pot, but I still believe that he's going to have to fold more than half his range. So when we bet on the turn, we figure to be making a good bet a good portion of the time, and then we get once again a new choice on the river where if he'll ever fold a bad ace, then once again we show a profit. So against our the players trying to play well, I really do think that continuing to test them and making them call you down with one pair is going to show a huge profit in these games. And the other thing is these are also the players that are much more likely to be paying attention. So if the worst case scenario is they call you down, like let's say I just continued to bet on that other table and he called me down with his whatever trash he was coming along with, then I've got a customer for life. Now I know a couple things. I know I can value bet that guy weekly, but I also know that I also know that guy's now seeing me bluff, so maybe he'll call me down even lighter than he did. So with the queen 10 suited, obviously I have a monster draw, but I'm just going to call. I think that his min raise on the flop represents a decent amount of strength. 6 is a pretty poor card, about as bad as imaginable, really. Now he bets all in. We're not getting the price anymore, so we're just going to get away. And that's another good example. There's no shame in having to fold a decent draw and no limit hold'em. Shouldn't have clicked fold automatically. I would have called with Jack 9 offsuit there, but there really is no shame in folding draws in no limit. Just because you flop a strong draw does not mean you need to see showdown regardless of what comes off. So Xavier min raised ace king under the gun. Kind of lets us know, and this Yeboah actually cold called Jack 10 off in the small blind. So that lets us know a little bit more about each of these players. We know Xavier's probably not so strong. I still maintain that he's trying to play well. I mean, we also noticed that he did not continuation bet at any point in that hand, which is fairly weak. I mean, it's not so bad because he figures that he's just trying to get to showdown with a hand that could be good, and it was. And I guess the players are unlikely to test you in these games, and I guess how bad could it really be? But I think if I were him, I would have raised more pre-flop, and then I would have also got to work continuation betting. We just folded to this guy. He min re-raises us. I don't think we can fold against a short stack like this. He did do it instantly, which could be strength, but this time he just had terrible garbage. He's going to need a king to move on to the next round. Doesn't get it. Sorry, buddy. It's nice playing with you. One bet timing tell that I will really stand pretty firmly by in these games is, the quicker people act, the worse their hand usually is, just because when people have a big hand, they usually have a decision like, oh, do I want to just call with my top set? Do I want to raise it? No one's going to be like, ooh, top set, raise. People just don't generally do that because most people at least consider slow playing it. But oftentimes people will have decided that they're going to bluff before, regardless of what card comes off, and so whatever comes off doesn't change the fact that they're going to bluff. Now here with the 7-6, we're just going to continuation bet, kind of just to protect our hand. We can't really hope to get more action on later streets if he improves. And what can he improve to that we beat anyway? So we'll just bet and protect. Marius Dig strikes me as a guy who might be playing with case money. We're not going to limp him with the king 4 off because he buys in for $32.60. Table Dancer looks to be isolating here. Queen 9 off is not enough to continue. Now, if I were Table Dancer here, I would very often... I think this is a spot where we can go back to our continuation betting idea versus players who are trying to play well, because on a Jack 9-3 two hearts board, there are a lot of hands who can call one bet that won't call two. All the small pairs, even like 9-8, 9-10, fairly often. McBoss is a new player, buys in for a full stack and waits for his big blind. Strikes me that he might know what he's doing, so we are going to start with our strategy against him. 3, we make a pair. Meaningless, though. We're going to make him call us down. He's new to the table. He doesn't know who we are. 5 is a very good card to continue our bluff with. If he has a king, I expect to get called, probably, but not always. And if he has a 10, I expect him to fold. We have showdown value, which changes things a little bit, but once again, it seems like we're bluffing a lot on the end, but we're really, all bets are relative. We're not, some people have a mentality like, I don't want to bluff half my stack, but when you're bluffing half a stack to win half a stack, you're getting a good price, and I would be surprised if you could have called 50% of the time there. And I think each one of those bets was a good one. I think the flop bet was plain. I think the turn bet was correct, and I think the river bet was as well. And I think that one thing to note is this continuation betting strategy kind of goes out the window if our opponents are more likely to semi-bluff weak draws, there are plenty of opponents in the games that I play where king 10-6 flop, sometimes my opponents will be check raising ace 10 or something. Against opponents like that, we need to start checking our continuation betting, and we need to slow down when we have showdown value and so on. But these opponents, I have not ran into a lot of opponents here who have been putting a lot of action with marginal made hands. It's often guys, there are plenty of opponents who just bluff, but there are not so many who are going for thin value against me, and there's not so many that are trying to play well and willing to call me down late, looking me up for a bluff or whatever. So, and they're smart, because in general, like I said, in these games, it's not the correct play you won't see me looking a lot of people up late in these games unless I have a very specific reason to do so. McBoss probably going to be a little wary of us. We're going to raise it pretty big here. And he's not going to be so pleased with us after having to fold last time, but he folds. It's not the end of the world. Over here with the 7-6 suited, we raise and basically get min raised. Maybe definitely just get min raised. So we'll call, definitely. We're plenty deep to continue. Another very good example of a hand where I will not be semi-bluff raising on the flop. He's never going to put me on 7-6 if I somehow make a hand. His minimum bet, this is interesting. I feel like minimum bets could be that he's just trying to protect kings. What we're going to do is we're going to call here. That's a pretty bad turn for us, because now it kind of erases our 10 outs. We're going to check here, and if he bets big now, I will expect that he had exactly aces. But it's only 3. Sorry, I'm trying to do the mental math here. Because basically what we need to worry about here, I am going to call this bet. It's a small bet. We're essentially getting 3-1, and we're about 4-1 against to make our hand. But if I make a 5, I think I can almost always stack aces, and that's a pretty big. That 5 specifically is not the best 5, but I'm gonna bet like double pot. I don't think he's ever going to get away. If he has like a set of aces, he may get away from kings. Over here, the guy bets out $4 into this board, so we'll just get away. So that 7-6 hand was kind of strange, he wound up giving me such a good price. I'm having trouble kind of putting him on a hand now, though, with the mid re-raise pre-flop, and then the small betting post flop. I think I just do believe that he had kings and couldn't call a river bet. My idea on the river bet sizing was that I get more out. The hands that are going to call, like for instance, like aces is not going to raise me on that river, but aces will almost definitely call. And I mean, kings obviously isn't going to raise me either, but kings will usually call as well. Maybe not for double pot, but I want to make him make a choice, and I figure if he does have a big hand, then he'll just pay me off. Although with his bet sizing, it's probably true that he isn't usually going to have a big hand, especially when that jack comes. Now there are just so many draws. Okay, another interesting spot. 2 is a great card for me. I'm going to bluff this one big as well, but I'm only going to bluff full pot. I think he has like queen jack or maybe like king jack. Queen 9. Didn't expect him to call. One thing that probably should have been a consideration a little. I mean, I still stand by the bet. I don't think that. I didn't expect him to call with queen 9. One thing to consider in a spot like that, though, is that we generally want our opponents. We want to be aware of what's just happened. So I just fired off a double pot bet into the river in the last hand we played, and he folded. So he's gonna be more inclined to look me up, but in general, I don't. My reading against him was that he was a guy who was trying to play well, and I didn't think he could call with queen 9, but he did. So now we'll learn from that, and not make the same mistake next time. Now we can brand this guy as a guy that we're going to basically strictly pound for value, and if he's going to, in general, be calling me with pot size bets with the queen 9 there, he's just going to lose against me in long term because I don't need to bluff every single time. I think. On the other hand, and the ace-jack is not enough. This guy seems to try to be playing well. Raises pot. Ace-jack is not a hand that's going to make a lot of disguised hands that I can win with, so I'll just fold it. But I think if my general strategy is to try to pound away on guys in these games until they look me up late or catch me coming after them late, and then adjust to them afterwards, like this Xavier guy now, I'm just going to be showing him the nuts the rest of the session, and he's going to be confused because what just happened was calling with that queen 9 reinforced a notion of his that he has of me, where he thinks that I'm going to just so often be showing up late that he thinks he needs to be looking me up. It's kind of annoying because you're going to have bluffs more often than you're going to have made hands, but you win more with made hands than you do with bluffs, so I think that we're going to be just fine. There's some table talk going on our other table. I must have missed something cool, so let's pull it up, see what happened. Oh. This guy tracked down some running straight. Let's see how this guy tested him. Maurice Dig just check called pot with his gutter on the flop. Check called. Check called turn, which gave him an open ender, which is fine. And then just open jam the river. So it was good. I'm happy for him that he open jammed the river. I think one spot people don't always get the most value is when. So say there's a 1-card straight available, like his board, where the board is 7, 9, 10, jack, and any 8 makes a 1-card straight. I think if you just bet like pot there, you're going to often, I mean obviously like an 8's always going to look you up, but like just overbetting and getting the rest in, I feel like you give yourself, and you have, I'm sorry, and you have a hand that's better than the one card straight, like queen in his case, or if you had king queen. I think that you're giving up a lot of value by not just like getting the rest in, because for some reason I think that people in lower stakes read over bets as bluffs, and I think sets and stuff like that will often look you up, but I think also, but they'll never raise if you just bet a small amount. And same thing with just a naked 8. You know, some guys will raise that, but I think most guys will just call. And but the other thing is they're never going to fold. So if you just like jam it in, they may not feel great about it, but they're not going anywhere, man. With a straight, come on. So we're coming down on it here. About 4 minutes left. I think we got in some fairly interesting situations. Wish we got in a few more, but hopefully this video is pretty instructive. And once again, I don't know if I necessarily play perfectly at these limits yet, but I hope that I am good enough at analyzing hands afterwards that I can understand or look back and review the play, you know, because I don't think it's necessarily any more valuable for you guys to watch a video where someone plays perfectly every time than a video where someone plays generally well with a few mistakes but then is able to discuss those mistakes. I'm still on the fence about, I'm not on the fence about the hand where I bluffed against Xavier and he got to show me queen 9. You guys won't get to see me reap the rewards of when eventually I make a good hand. Because I'm going to stop playing after this is over. But King Jack over here. I'm going to just check it. Try to induce, I guess. I don't see a ton of value in betting. Now I'll bet. See if he won't try to draw with a naked spade, or maybe he does have a worse jack. But yeah, like I was saying, you guys won't get to see me reap the benefits of showing him a pretty big bluff like that. But they're there. You can trust me on that one. Obviously, if he's willing to call me with queen 9, he's going to go broke to me at some point when I have a monster. Because he puts himself in such a tricky spot by making his default to just call down any pair against me, because, I'm not going to make monsters so often, but basically I'm going to shut it down against him bluffing-wise, and most of my opponents will give me no credit for being able to change gears. They see a guy who shows a bluff and call him a bluffer, and that's smart in general in these games, but against us, who are going to be the players who are smart enough to change gears, those guys are hopeless, because I'm not going to make, maybe I should have bet for value with that 8-6, I kind of put him on no hand, I thought he would bluff it, but yeah, I'm not going to make monsters so often, but if every time I make a monster and he makes one pair, he's going to lose a stack or lose like half a stack or more, like he's going to be in real tough shape against me. Because I think one mistake a lot of players make at these limits too is not realizing that if you have a bluffy image, that you also need to be betting strong with your marginal hands, because if you're not willing to value bet weekly, then your bluffs have a lot less value, which sounds strange, but what I'm basically saying is if you can value bet weekly and guys are also trying to track you down with their one pairs and stuff, you're making it so much more expensive for them to try to pull this bluff catching routine against you. Okay, so we turn a set here. The video is just about over, by the way, but we'll finish this hand up. We turn a set. This guy's thinking and tanking and tanking. He did bet fairly strong on the flop. I hope that he's capable of like a check raise. I'm going to bet. If he doesn't have anything, he doesn't have anything. I don't know, but I think it's a mistake to check back, because if he is going for a check raise, then I miss out on so much value by checking, because so many scare cards can come on the river like if he had aces, and then a card completing a one card straight comes, or maybe backdoor clubs or something, then it's just a total disaster for me. So while it's kind of unlikely that he does have a hand, I just need to bet anyway. I'm missing out on more when he does have a hand and I check than I am when he doesn't have a hand and checking back, because he's not going to make a pair or whatever that often. And he can also make a hand better than mine if I check. You know, what if he has pocket sixes or the clubs or whatever. Alright, I'm not even going to wait for the blinds. I'm just going to wrap it up because this is getting to it. But hopefully this video is instructive for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. And once again, would love to hear your feedback. I would like to explore any concepts that I was only able to gloss over in this video. And, you know, I'll be willing to answer any questions you guys have. So thanks a lot for tuning in. And I will see you guys on my next video. Bye-bye.